but it's the state that the remains were found in and some of the other things that were found in conjunction with these remains that raise a lot of questions. Hey, what's going on, guys? MrBallen here. You probably know me from TikTok, where I am known for telling scary stories and talking about unsolved mysteries and true crime. But if you are not coming from TikTok, and I'm starting to see a trend that actually a lot of people are just finding me on YouTube, which is really cool. I was a Navy SEAL for a couple of years. I was actually medically retired in 2017. And I started making content about my military experience, mostly on Instagram. And then I joined TikTok in the early part of this year. And at some point, I just wanted to try something new and wanted to try a different content style. So I posted about an unsolved mystery, which is the Dyatlov Pass incident. It's about a bunch of hikers that disappeared in the mountains of in Russia, and no one really knows why. And it takes off, and it's something that I just am really interested in. I think unsolved mysteries are fascinating. I find myself almost as a hobby researching this stuff. And it was cool to finally have a place where I could actually create content around unsolved mysteries and true crime and kind of scary stuff. And TikTok was the place. But what I'm trying to do is transition over to YouTube, where I can tell longer versions of these stories and get a little bit more in depth. And so I have committed to posting at least one of these types of videos on YouTube a week. And I hope that you will subscribe and you will follow along, because right now my YouTube skills are very low. Admittedly, I'm pretty good at TikTok. I'm pretty bad at YouTube, but I'm going to get better. I would also love it if you guys have suggestions for videos that you pass them my way, either in the comments of the video, or you can shoot me a DM on Instagram. My handle is JohnBAllen416. So JohnBallen416. Shoot me a DM and I'd love to hear your feedback. So today we're going to talk about one of the more well-known unsolved mysteries, and it is the very strange disappearance of two college students from the Netherlands who go to Panama, and they've saved up all this money to go on this trip. Like, they were working in a cafe for the 6 months leading up to this trip that they were going to finance mostly themselves. They had mapped out all these different places they're going to go in Panama. It was going to be like part vacation, part like mission trip, where they were going to be helping out with different charities in the different villages they go to, but also enjoying the travel. These girls were very close. They were highly intelligent. They were just wonderful, smart people. And they were really excited about this trip. And they go to Panama, and the first couple weeks go without incident. And at some point, things take a very significant turn for the worst. And so let's dive in. On March 15th, 2014, Chris Kremers and Lisanne Vroon, who were both Dutch college students, head to Panama for a 6-week-long part vacation, part charitable giving trip. They had mapped out these 6 weeks really diligently. They planned to do lots of traveling and exploring, and then also they were going to be working with different charities along the way as they went all over Panama. And they were really excited about it. They had even worked for the 6 months leading up to this trip at a cafe to raise additional money for this trip. So March 15th, they arrive in Panama. The first 2 weeks they're there go beautifully. They do some traveling, they're working with different charities, and everything is going to plan. And then by the second week, they arrive in a little town called Phuket, and they stay at this hostel. So that's like a group living situation. It's pretty common amongst travelers all over the world, where to save money, you'll crash at these almost like dorms, where other travelers and people will stay in the same room as you. 2 weeks in, they're in Phuket and they're living in this hostel. So on April 1st, they're in Phuket, and they want to go on this fairly significant hike, which is going to be around this massive volcano called the Baru volcano. Up near, I guess, the summit of the volcano, there was this amazing overlook where if you climbed up to it, you could get a beautiful 360-degree view of the entire area. Vroon and Kremers decide they want to go hike up to that overlook. They were experienced hikers, but realistically, I don't think they were taking this hike particularly seriously. It was a hike that was traditionally a guided hike, meaning usually you went and did this with a local who could make sure you didn't leave the path or, fall where you didn't know there was a cliff or something. They opt to do this on their own. So they head out, and they bring the hostel owner had a dog and they decided to bring that dog along with them. It was a very friendly dog. So Kremers, Froon, and the dog head off for this hike up this volcano. They had a digital camera with them, in addition to water, and they had their phones, they had all the different kind of basic supplies. They had a camera, and so this is important because they take a bunch of pictures as they begin this journey. So that night, the dog returns to the hostel, but the girls aren't with the dog, and so this alerts the owners of the hostel. But they search the area, like I guess the immediate area, for the girls. They can't find them, and they decide, we'll just wait until the morning and see if they turn up. The next morning, they don't turn up. Additionally, the parents of the girls, they were used to getting very regular text messages from these girls to kind of let them know that everything was okay, and the text messages stopped. And so that alerted the parents as well by the second day after they've gone missing. And so authorities are alerted. Search crews were organized on foot for the first day. So April 2nd, there are search crews all over the place looking for these girls. Can't find anything. The next day, they set up aerial search teams. They're scouring the jungle looking for signs of these girls. No sign of them. The search continues, and then on April 6th, the parents of Kremers and Froon, they arrive in Panama. They immediately offer a $30,000 reward for any information about their daughters, which is a ton of money in Panama. It's roughly equivalent to about $500,000 in a developed country. I mean, with 30,000 US dollars in Panama, I mean, you could buy land, you could buy a house, you could start a business. I mean, this is big money. And considering many people, especially in that area, were day laborers that were working for like less than $10 a day. I mean, you would think that type of reward for just information about these girls would incite hundreds of people to just on their own go looking for these girls. And if you consider too that, I mean, this is a small town. I mean, news travels fast. This is the area they probably grew up in. They know the area really well. The idea that with an amazing incentive, the financial incentive, and just the fact that they know this area really, really well, it was odd that nothing was turning up. There were no leads coming in. 3 months go by, and there is not a sign of these girls anywhere. They have vanished. There's no leads. Nothing's been found. Obviously at this point, the family and investigators have pretty much accepted that they're probably deceased at this point, but they're looking for them. They want to know what happened. And a local woman finds Froon's backpack, her blue backpack, 5 miles away from where the girls were supposedly hiking, or where they had intended to hike. Navigating a jungle is exceptionally difficult. Even with the right equipment, even knowing what you're doing, the travel is so slow. Cutting through the growth on the ground, there's animals to contend with, even though it's incredibly moist, and there's lots of moisture in a jungle, the water oftentimes can't be drank. So the risk of dehydration is really high. The jungle that they were in was incredibly mountainous. And so in addition to just navigating a jungle, you're dealing with pretty significant elevation changes. I mean, it is a treacherous place to be navigating, absolutely treacherous. And for them to have moved 5 miles through dense jungle it's incredible. That is almost unbelievable. But nonetheless, their backpack is found, 5 miles away. In addition, the woman who found the backpack, she was a local woman, and she said, I'm out in this area a fair amount, and I've not seen this backpack. I saw it today, and I picked it up and reported it. But it just means that the backpack probably had not been sitting there for very long. It had been probably placed there within the past couple of days, let's say, which doesn't really provide that much clarity, but it adds to the kind of intrigue around what actually happened. So the backpack was in great condition, and everything inside the backpack was very neatly kind of placed. It looked like someone had very intentionally placed everything in the bag, zipped it up neatly, and put it down by the riverside to be found. It didn't have the look and feel of a backpack belonging to two missing people in the Panamanian jungle that's been missing for the past 3 months. It looked like it had just been grabbed off a shelf, put some stuff in it, and put down. But either way, inside there was, their sunglasses, there was a water bottle, there was some underwear that was in there, and their digital camera was in there, which is going to be really important. And both of their phones were in there, another really important part of this investigation. So when the initial search was conducted, it was done with a focus on the volcano area, because that's the last place the girls had been, at least as far as everybody understood. But now that they found this backpack 5 miles away, they had a new area to search. And so they start searching around the area around the backpack, and they quickly find some of the girls' clothing neatly folded on the side of a river, but no sign of the girls. And then another 2 months go by, and they finally locate, in the same rough area that the clothes and the backpack were found, they actually discover some of the remains of the girls that DNA confirms it was them. But it's the state that the remains were found in, and some of the other things that were found in conjunction with these remains that raise a lot of questions. So of the remains that were found, DNA proved that some of them were Chris Kremers and Lisa Froon. DNA also showed that mixed in with some of the bone fragments and pieces of remains that were found were at least 3 other people's remains. So we're talking about 5 people's remains in the same area. Also, interestingly, scientists were able to look at the bones, and there were no scratches on the bones. So that's important if you think about it, because their bones were found all over the place. They had been, broken apart, right? Well, if an animal had been responsible, there would have been scratches all over the bones because they would have broken the bones that way. Without those scratches, the only other way it could happen is if they've basically been pulverized, basically broken with blunt force. So obviously something horrible has happened to these 2 girls, but their remains really only show investigators that the women had died. It doesn't show how they died or really anything. And so investigators needed to look at the other evidence to try to get a better sense of what actually happened. And so they look at the phone records, and they can tell that on April 1st, when they started this hike initially, there is a string of distress calls that are sent within an hour of the hike starting. So whatever happened to these girls happened almost immediately on their hike. None of those calls connect. Over the course of those first 4 days, as they're trying to reach help via their cell phone, nothing's connecting, and then Froon's phone dies. Kremer's phone does not, and they begin turning it off and then turning it on sporadically to try to get reception. On April 6th, something interesting starts to happen. Somebody was trying to access Kremer's phone. There was multiple failed login attempts, and it got to the point where you weren't even allowed to input any more codes. It was just locked, the phone locked. So somebody was unable to get into the phone. From April 7th to April 10th, there were 77 calls attempted, distress calls attempted. And then on April 11th, the phone died, and that was it. So in addition to the phone, they started looking at the camera. And so when you look at all the pictures they took, the beginning of the camera roll is this wonderful, montage of these 2 girls having this great time hiking up this volcano. And then as night begins to fall, you can tell that their expressions begin to change a little bit. It looks like you could begin to see that maybe something was wrong. Perhaps they're lost. We don't really know. But then there's no more pictures taken until April 8th. Over 90 pictures are taken between April 8th and April 10th, which is that period of time where all those distress calls were made on Kremer's phone before Kremer's phone finally died. The pictures are very strange. There's a lot of theories about why they took the pictures they did, but in a nutshell, the pictures, none of them include pictures of the girls, with the exception of one, which is the back of Kremer's head, and it appears to be bleeding. The rest are shots of the landscape, and they're all taken in total darkness. So they're in the middle of the jungle in total darkness taking these pictures. There was one picture that looked like whatever gear they had been kind of lined up on a rock, and someone had taken a picture of it. There were pictures of candy wrappers, and there also was a picture that was like looking down into a ravine that perhaps was a picture of one of the girls down in the ravine. So it's unclear who's taking the pictures. It could be the girls, could be one of the girls, could be a third party, we don't know. And then there's a ton of speculation about one picture in particular. So picture 509, as it's been dubbed, because that was the number on the camera roll, was deleted from the camera. Now, that in and of itself is not particularly strange. It's not crazy to think that these girls might have deleted a picture, right? I mean, maybe they accidentally snapshot something and they just deleted it. But it was permanently deleted, right? So if you hit delete on a digital camera, it's deleted. But a professional with the right software could reconstruct that image if they plugged it into a computer. Now, in order to permanently remove it from your camera, the girls would have had to connect it to a laptop, to a computer, and wipe it that way. They didn't have access to a computer. So at most, they might have hit delete, but it still would have had that kind of archived, almost ghost image that a professional investigator could have reconstructed. But when they went to do that with this deleted image, it was wiped for good. So someone had managed to professionally wipe one picture. It was the last picture on the camera roll. So the pervading theory here is that these girls got lost and fell to their death. But to me, that's totally unsatisfactory. I believe they were murdered. And I think it's because there's just too many things indicating that foul play was involved. How did they go 5 miles across incredibly rugged terrain that even amongst Navy SEALs, that would be a very difficult distance to cover, even with all the right equipment? How did they, without the right equipment, not knowing the area, without a guide, without even flashlights, how did they do that? And then let's just assume they managed to go the 5 miles, okay? They fall to their death. Why are their remains, 1, incomplete, and 2, scattered and mixed in with other people's remains? Why were Kremer's bones bleached? And why weren't there scratch marks on the bones? I mean, you would think that in order for if they'd fallen off this cliff, let's say, in order for their remains to be scattered all over the place and be dismembered, that an animal would have to be involved if there's no foul play involved. And there's no scratch marks on the bones, so an animal couldn't have done it. So there's lots of questions that go unanswered. And then if you look at those pictures again, it seems an awful lot like somebody else was taking those pictures. Somebody was trying to access Kremer's phone towards the end there, and someone looks like they were using their camera as well. And then, the backpack that was found, it just seems like it was kind of staged. But then again, like, to what end? Why were they giving away the camera and the phone, which kind of led them to thinking probably this is foul play? Why would they have placed the backpack? That doesn't really exonerate anybody. It actually just adds more questions about the case. So the whole thing is just very confusing, but the narrative that they simply got lost and fell, to me, seems like the most far-fetched thing out of all the theories. So that's gonna do it, guys. If you liked this, please like and subscribe. I'll be doing these at least once a week. I'd love it as well if you dropped in the comments suggestions for future videos. And also, please, if you want to message me, hit me up on Instagram. My handle is JohnBAllen416. Also, please follow me on TikTok. That's MrBallen on TikTok. And so that's going to do it, guys. Let me know what you think happened in the comments. Thanks. This is from his friend outside. What's going on, guys? MrBallen here. Earlier, I had been saying you probably know me from TikTok, but the reality is the majority of people that are watching this video or who have watched my other videos are actually just from YouTube, which is really cool to feel like YouTube is promoting some of my videos. I think I'm incredibly lucky to have that be happening. I'm incredibly lucky to have this page growing as quickly as it is. And I'm incredibly lucky to have you paying attention, even if it's just for a few minutes. So thank you for tuning in. A little bit about me. I am a former Navy SEAL. I got medically retired at the end of 2017. I initially started making content that was pretty much exclusively about being a Navy SEAL and my experiences. But then when I got on TikTok at the end of 2019, early 2020, I kind of just completely pivoted and started sharing stories that I was just fundamentally interested in. Scary stories, true crime, mysteries, that type of content, purely because I enjoy it. I was very fortunate that it took off on TikTok, and here I am on YouTube, kind of trying to do the same thing, sharing content about, darker but really interesting, compelling stories. It's just something I'm passionate about, and I'm really happy that I'm starting to grow a platform that is based on that, because I would love to do this indefinitely. So today I'm going to be covering a very famous haunting. But before I get into any details about it, I want to be upfront with the people watching this video. This video and my channel in general are not designed to be, an attempt at convincing people that the paranormal is real or that ghosts are real. But rather, I want to cover stories that are just plain interesting. And I like covering things that are of the darker variety. True crime, certainly unsolved mysteries falls into that. I love that genre, the kind of dark, mysterious genre. And so this story really interests me because there's lots of photo evidence. There's multiple witnesses that kind of corroborate, not necessarily that ghosts are real, but rather that the events that led to people speculating it was a haunting. There are people that corroborate the details, meaning the story is cohesive, that the actors in the story, basically corroborate one another. And so it leads us down a path to getting to the end of the story, and we're like, well, what the hell happened? Because if it's not a haunting, what was it? Because a bunch of things happened that are pretty difficult to explain. So the too long didn't read version of this story is you have a single mom who moves into a home with her kids, and she starts hearing noises in the walls, in the attic. She can't make sense of it. She has friends and, the babysitter that are at the house that also hear it. Her ex-husband starts to experience it. You have all these people experiencing these weird phenomena happening in the house. And then, through a weird series of events that involves priests, landlords, and child protective services, they have a paranormal investigator come over with camera equipment and all that. They come in the house and they end up documenting quite a bit of startling imagery and footage that only lends credibility to the fact that this actually might be a real haunting. So that's the story in a nutshell. Let's dive in. In 1989, a 23-year-old woman named Jackie Hernandez has just broken up with her husband, Al. It was an amicable separation. They just weren't on good terms. They decided it's time to get a divorce, but we will happily co-parent our two kids together. So it's an amicable breakup. Jackie moves into a small, modest home in San Pedro, California, with the kids. And she's working a ton. She's a student at night. She's working multiple jobs. It's a very hard, stressful time, but she's doing her best to support her family and kind of land on her feet. So about a month after living in this house, Jackie comes home from a long day at school and work, and she sits down, the kids are asleep, and she puts on the TV, and she's just trying to decompress. And as she's sitting there, she starts to hear what sounds like little pebbles falling down inside of the walls. So she mutes the TV and she's listening, and it's just periodically little pebbles are falling down the wall. She goes up and she's listening, or with her ear against the wall, and she's thinking to herself, there's got to be, a mouse or some critter up in my attic, unfortunately, that's kicking some pebbles into a gap in the wall. And as she's listening, she thinks she hears what sounds like footsteps in the attic. And so it startles her. Now she's really paying close attention to the attic. She doesn't hear it again. This is the first time she's heard anything like this, so she kind of did the very human sort of rationalizing what she had just heard and assumed she was just hearing things in the attic. It's just some critter. I'll deal with it later. So a couple days later, Jackie has her friend Susan over to just hang out with her at her house. The kids are asleep and they're relaxing, talking, sitting on the couch. And as they're sitting there, they hear a loud bang in the kitchen. It sounded like something had fallen. And so, at this point, Jackie had mentioned to Susan this weird, hey, I think I got an animal up in the attic because I heard some rocks falling through the walls. But the funny thing was I could have sworn I heard footsteps up there, but probably just my mind playing tricks on me. So Susan is keyed in that maybe there's a little bit of weirdness happening in the house. So when they hear this sound in the kitchen, it's like they both instantly go to, okay, what's happening here? Is this more to do with the footsteps in the attic, or is there a rational explanation? So they're on guard. They walk into the kitchen and they find a picture that was hanging on the wall that had fallen, which honestly that's not a cause for a ghost is in the house. But it was held up by a couple of nails. And the nails were removed from the picture frame and were standing on their head, point up, next to the image, next to the picture. So imagine if a picture falls, are all the nails going to come out and land perfectly on their head right next to it? No, it's almost impossible. But sure enough, that happened. So Susan and Jackie are staring at the picture, they're staring at the nails, and they have no idea what to make of it. Susan was a little bit more eager to connect it to these footsteps in the attic, but she also did not want to, frighten her friend because she knows she's living alone. And so they kind of talked a little bit about it, and maybe they both wanted to have that discussion about what's happening in the house, but they both kind of decided, without saying anything, that we're going to kind of avoid this topic. And so they put the picture away, the nails away. Susan actually decides to just leave because she's a little bit freaked out, and so she's gone. The next night, Susan actually brings over a new babysitter. It's this 16-year-old girl named Tina. And so I guess, Jackie wanted a little bit of time to leave the house. She thought that she was kind of losing her mind with all the stress of work and school. And so Tina comes over. Jackie had not told Tina anything about what was going on in the house. It was just like, hey, take care of the kids, I'll see you in a little bit. She's sitting on the couch, Tina, the babysitter, and she just like, you know what, I'm gonna go just check on the kids. I got a weird feeling, just make sure they're okay in their bedrooms. And as soon as she goes to push the door opens, which she remembers in an interview saying it was strange that before it actually made contact with the door swung open. But, I didn't think anything of it. I walked in, the sun is just fine. So I walked back out and I shut the door. But as soon as I shut it, I turned around and it was starting to open again. And she describes thinking that, oh, I guess, the house must be, not level or something. Jackie comes home and Tina tells her about the door. And I think that Tina on some level was hoping that Jackie, being the adult, would, hear what she was saying and have just a totally rational explanation for what was going on. Like, oh, the door always does that, something like that. But Tina was shocked when she told her this, and Jackie reacted visibly like she was concerned. And Tina's like keying in on it, and she was like, do you know why this could happen? Why the door would be kind of opening on its own? And Jackie just said, honestly, there's been a couple of weird things that have happened. And so they talked about it a little bit, but ultimately, they both just decided, you know what? I think that we're connecting things that don't need to be connected. It's just a couple of strange occurrences. So Tina leaves, Jackie goes to bed, and they don't think about it. So the next day, Jackie has Tina come back over because she needs some more help with the kids. And so as they're standing in the kitchen, Jackie's describing to Tina what she needs to do that night, when to feed the kids, what time to put them to bed. Tina just kind of stops paying attention to Jackie and looks up at the corner of the kitchen. And so in the back corner of the kitchen, Tina's looking and she says, did you put in a new light in the corner of your kitchen? And Jackie looks too, and she's like, whoa, what is that? And it looks like there's this like light bulb, kind of a weird looking light bulb in the corner of the kitchen on the ceiling, which there wasn't a light bulb over there. And Jackie says as much, and they're looking at it, and then it begins to move. Not towards them, it was like just kind of moving around, like an orb of light that was kind of moving around. And now, had Jackie and Tina relayed that particular experience, almost everybody or virtually everyone would be like, yeah, okay, you saw a floating light in your kitchen. Well, they took a picture of it because it didn't go away. So they went and got a camera and they took this picture. And so you can see there's like this blob of light that was in their kitchen. Between the pebbles in the wall, the footsteps in the attic, the falling picture with the nails standing on their head, with, Tina saying the door wouldn't shut, and now this orb of light. Now, Jackie has officially kind of gone from, I'm going to play this rational and not worry about it, to, I have no idea what's wrong and I can't explain this. I can't tell people this without them thinking I'm crazy, with the exception of Susan and Tina, because her kids were too young to know what was going on. There's no one that she felt comfortable sharing her anxieties and fear about what was happening, because how do you, a skeptical, rational person, go to for example, the police and say, hey, there's nothing in my attic, but I believe there's someone walking around my attic and kicking pebbles into my walls and knocking pictures off the wall and taking the nails out, standing them on the head. Like they're going to say that, well, are you doing this? Are your kids doing this? And so the only person that Jackie finally felt comfortable telling was her ex-husband, because they were still amicable. She has Al come over and she finally says to him, I have a lot of weird things happening. She showed him the picture of the lights in the kitchen, and she describes everything that happened in the house. And Al would say that in a way he thought that this was just kind of an act to maybe draw attention to the fact that she was lonely and that she missed him. He wasn't sure if that's what it was, but he definitely was not ready to believe in anything she was saying. He just kind of felt bad for the position she was in. So he listens and he says, look, kind of almost playing along with her. He's like, let's just call it out. If there's something happening in your house, we should call it out. And so he stands up and she's saying, no, don't do that, don't do that. And he goes, whoever's here, show yourself. And they're looking around, nothing. And I think in a way, Jackie was disappointed that there wasn't, footsteps in the attic right then and there, but there was nothing. And so Al kind of does there's nothing to worry about here, just stop worrying about it. And so he leaves, and, Jackie's disappointed, but not shocked. And she goes to put something away in the closet. This is immediately after he's left. And she opens this closet, and inside the closet, on every wall, inside the closet on the back of the door, was written Al, A in red and the L in blue, A-L, all over the wall. And that had not been there before, and what she believes was a response to the challenge by Al. So at this point, if she had money, she said she would have left, but she didn't. She didn't have the resources to move. And so she's just kind of trapped, and she's expressing her concerns and her anxiety to her friend Susan. And the two of them are actually out for a walk in their neighborhood, and she's telling Susan how scared she is and like, what do I even do? And it just so happens that the landlord, her landlord, Jackie's landlord, was walking down the street at the same time, and they bump into each other. They have some pleasantries, and Susan, just kind of without even asking Jackie's permission, says to the landlord, hey, there's some weird stuff happening in our house. She doesn't want to tell anyone because she thinks people will think she's crazy. And so they go into describing to the landlord all the strange happenings in the house, the lights that they got a picture of, the pebbles, the footsteps, all of it. And the landlord is very religious and is very concerned and says, would you allow me to have 2 priests come to your house and check your house out? And Jackie is a religious person, but to be honest, was a little skeptical at the idea of introducing religion to what was going on. I think that for her, she just wanted it to go away, but then again, she had nowhere to turn. And so she was like, okay, we'll have the priest come over and check it out. So the next day, these 2 priests show up to her house, and Jackie's house was very much in disarray. She had 2 young kids, she was working multiple jobs, doing school late, and she had all this weirdness happening in her house. And so when they showed up, her house was a total mess. Her kids are crying. It's a madhouse. And ultimately what happened from this visit is the priest walked around, offered to bless her children, but really they didn't have any sort of like conclusion. And then they leave, and Jackie was like, well, that didn't really do anything for me, but okay. The next day, she gets a visit from Child Protective Services because the priest had actually filed a complaint saying that this was all a hallucination by an incompetent mother. This notion that the house was haunted, combined with when they showed up, the house was a total mess. They just said, I don't think the kids are safe. And so Child Protective Services gets called, who basically threatened Jackie to like clean it up. Literally clean up your house, but like we're going to be checking in on you to make sure you're a fit mother. And so this is a huge blow, because now Jackie is seeing what happens when you bring up that your house is haunted, right? That this is what can happen. And so now she is not prepared to share this with anybody. So over the next couple of weeks, Jackie brings her kids into the living room and they all start sleeping in the same room. She's increasingly paranoid. She's overworked and she's not sleeping enough, and she's just kind of really spiraling. And, Susan, who's her friend, is really taking a notice, is noticing this. And she also knows the sensitivity of being able to really share this with, authority, because she knows what the Child Protective Services call, and she knows that Jackie is really afraid to share the story with anyone. But she goes over and she tells her, you have to call a paranormal investigator. It is probably the only group of people that if you reach out to them with this story, they're not going to treat you like they're crazy. And if nothing else, that is a reason to call them. Even if what they provide is worthless to you, that it doesn't accomplish anything, they're at least a group of people that are going to take you seriously. And so finally, Jackie just says, okay, let's do it. So a couple days go by and this team shows up at their house, this paranormal investigator team. They have cameras and recorders. I mean, they are in it to try to capture footage. And even though they were ready to listen to Jackie and had obviously taken her seriously enough that they had shown up at her house, they were fairly skeptical. They, by their own admission afterwards, after this whole case had happened, they had said that they had covered over 3,000 cases prior to this and brought their recording equipment and all that, had never once found anything usable that would even hint at the existence of ghosts or the paranormal. And so you could say that they were sympathetic to people that had these experiences, but usually either there was nothing going on or they found a rational explanation for whatever the person was claiming to happen. They didn't have any paranormal footage. So they're interviewing Jackie on camera, the three investigators that are there. They're kind of asking her some questions about what's going on and filming it. And Jackie had actually invited her ex-husband Al to be there with the kids. So he's in the other room with the kids and they're interviewing her, and then the power goes out, which it sounds pretty cliche, and I get that, but the power goes off and then the power comes back on and it visibly shakes Jackie. She had been living in this house with all these weird occurrences, and it was like she had this feeling that something bad was going to happen. And so she starts acting really, really scared. And she says, I'm telling you, there's something going on with the attic. And so they kind of stop the interview and they're like, all right, let's just go have a look at the attic. We'll go look, there won't be anything there. We'll come back down and we'll chat with her some more. And so one of the three investigators gets a ladder and crawls through this little crawl space into the attic. And so he goes up. And so while he's doing that, Al, who's in the other room with the kids, he's wide awake, laying with his son. He's just like waiting. He's not really expecting anything to happen. And as he's laying there, he could have sworn he heard someone whisper in his ear, tell them to get the hell out of here. And he has an interview he does where he describes this moment, and you can tell that Al is as skeptical as they come, and he's like, I just don't know how to explain it. I heard it clear as day, and right after I heard it, I heard a scream from the attic. The guy, the photographer who had gone up into the attic, he was alone up there, and he had brought his expensive camera, and he comes running downstairs or jumps through the hole and practically falls out of the attic, and he tells them, something grabbed my camera. There's no one up there, but something grabbed my camera. And his heart's racing, his face is pale, and the other investigators, they're starting to feel like, what's going on? Al comes bursting out of the room and he's like, what's going on? And the photographer's like, my camera. And he goes from being scared of what happened to now being like, that's my livelihood. I need to get that camera back. So he goes back up into the attic to retrieve his camera, and he finds the body of the camera in a crate in one side of the attic. And then the lens of the camera had been removed and placed on the other side of the attic. He comes down with his camera, and you can tell that what he's just discovered has really shaken him up, and the other investigators are also very shaken up. And whatever they planned to do that night, whether it was finishing the interview with Jackie or whatever, has now gone out the window. They're ready to leave. Jackie is pleading with them to stay. Al's freaked out. No one knows what's happening, and the investigator's like, yep, we're good. We'll be back soon, I promise. But really, they're just like, let's get out of here. And they bolt. After they leave, Al sticks around for a little bit longer, but ultimately has to go back because he has to work early the next day. And so Jackie is left all alone with the kids. She is totally freaked out. She feels like the investigators had upset the entity in the house. And so she's pretty much on edge for something bad to happen, and sure enough, it does. So that night, Jackie is laying on the sofa. She's in full crisis mode. She has no idea what's going on in her house. watching the investigators who are supposed to be investigating this stuff be obviously spooked and leave really unsettled her. She felt like she didn't have any support from Al. She just felt like the whole situation had just completely fallen apart, and she's so scared for her kids, and she's laying on the sofa, and at some point she must have passed out. And then she wakes up suddenly and she looks at the foot of her sofa and she believes she sees what appears to be the figure of an old man standing there looking at her kids. She screams, it vanishes, she grabs her kids and she runs out of the house. The first people she calls is the investigators because, again, she's worried about telling the police in fear that they would think it was her being crazy and have her kids taken from her. So she calls the investigators and they don't pick up, but she leaves a voicemail. And on the voicemail, she's completely desperate. She's like, please come back. I am out of the house. I can't go back in. I don't know what to do. Like, I can't go back in. Please help me. And one of the photographers who was there heard the voicemail and decides, you know what? We got to go back. It's super late at night. They find Jackie outside of her property in pajamas with her kids. She's totally freaked out. They bring her inside and the house is totally calm. There's no sign of anything going on. And so they're kind of walking around the house. No one goes in the attic, but they're just walking around and it's silent, it's calm. And after a little bit of time, maybe because it was so calm in the house, they decide, you know what, just because, let's go back up into the attic and just for sanity, let's just take some pictures and video and see what's up there. So two of the investigators go up into the attic. One has a flashlight and a camera, and then the other just has his camera. And so they go up there, and Jackie and the third investigator are kind of anxiously standing at the foot of the attic looking up. And the guys who are up in the attic walking around, they're reporting down to them, we don't see anything, we don't hear anything, it's quiet up here. But like the tension is building, right? And they stop at some point, the two in the attic, and it's just like silence. And all of them reported hearing a snap, and then another snap, and then a third snap, and then silence. And Jackie begins having this overwhelming sense of dread. The guys in the attic are trying to stay calm. They're like kind of trying to talk. Oh, that could have been the roof. Oh, it could have been this. But the investigator who's down below with Jackie and Jackie herself, they start kind of panicking. They're like, hey, come on, come back down. Let's not risk it. Something's about to happen. Come back down. So as they're making their way back over to the exit of the attic, and it's totally pitch black up there, minus whatever light source they had, all of a sudden, one of the investigators just gets yanked backwards into the attic. And it was actually the guy holding the flashlight. And so they hear a tumbling of the flashlight, a tumbling of the camera, and silence from this other investigator. The other investigator who's up in the attic with him that was not yanked back, he turns around and the guy is gone. And that guy who has not been yanked suddenly, all he has is this camera. The other guy had the flashlight. So he instinctively starts clicking pictures with his camera to use the flash. Jackie and the guy on the ground, they're screaming, what's going on? And he's just clicking pictures, not looking in the viewfinder, just flashing. And he sees one of the investigator has been hoisted up into the rafters of the attic, and he's been tied to a post, and they have a picture of it. And so they run over, the investigator who's up there with him, he runs over, he unties him, pulls him down, and that guy's, totally freaked out. He doesn't know how he got up there. They collect their stuff and they practically fall out of the attic, and it's just pure mayhem because the guy he's freaked out, he's ashen faced, he's got these marks on his neck like something was holding onto his neck, and they run out of the house, never to go back in. Jackie says that she's not experienced anything paranormal since this instance and swears that this was not a hoax, that in fact this is one of the lowest points of her life, and it made her look like an incompetent mother, and it makes her look crazy, and a lot of people still think she's crazy, and for her, this was just a traumatic experience that she has no explanation for. So I'd love to hear what you guys think. If there's a better explanation than ghosts, let me know in the comments, and please be sure to like and subscribe if you've not already. Also, you can check me out on Instagram. My handle's JohnBallen416, and then on TikTok, it's MrBallen as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Talk to you next week. What's going on, guys? MrBallen here, former Navy SEAL turned internet storyteller with a focus on the strange, dark, and mysterious. And speaking of mysterious, today I have a mystery for you, and it's one of the more recent mysteries. It happened in 2014 and spanned a couple of years following that. It is a story that plays out like a psychological thriller, and in fact, Netflix recently purchased the rights to make a movie or show about this case from the family that were the victims of this case. The too long didn't read version of this story is you have this all-American family that purchases their dream home. They're getting ready to move in, and they start receiving these awful, wrathful, threatening letters from some anonymous person or group. The letters get progressively worse and indicate that whoever is watching them very closely at all hours and is able to see things that are not easy to spot just from walking by. This is someone who is really intensely focused on the family. I think that the best way to watch this video and learn about this case, to really appreciate what this family went through, is to put yourself in the position of being the Broaddus family. That's the family that purchases the house. Imagine you're in their position. Would you have stayed or would you have left? And I'd love to hear about it in the comments section. So let's dive in. In June of 2014, Derek and Maria Broaddus purchased their dream home. It is a $1.3 million 6-bedroom house in Westfield, New Jersey, which is a very affluent northern New Jersey town. So the house they purchased was on Boulevard, that's the street name, and Boulevard within Westfield is what at the time was like the street. If you lived on Boulevard, you had made it. I would say that times have changed, because now Boulevard is remembered as the place where this case happened, so I would say it's probably not the best place to live anymore. But at the time, it was like Derek and Maria were living their dreams and they knew it. 3 days after the sale of the house, they hadn't moved in yet. Derek had gone to the house to do some painting of the walls and some simple house renovations. I think he was just so excited about this house. He just wanted to go over and just kind of be in the space. So his wife and his kids are back at their old house that they had sold but hadn't moved out of yet. And so he's at the new house and he's doing these simple renovations and he's like, you know what, I'm gonna check the mail. Because even though they'd only owned the house for 3 days, he was like, you know what the heck, see what it feels like to go collect the mail, because this is gonna be my new home. And so he goes out and he opens the mailbox, and inside is this little tiny card-shaped envelope addressed to the new owners.
Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I'll find out.
The letter goes on to identify what kind of car they were driving. It was a Honda minivan. It went on to say how many contractors were in and around the house over the past couple of days that were doing some renovations in the house. It even said that, I believe I've counted that you have 3 children. Someday I will learn their names and I will call to them and I will take them from you. It's like a reconnaissance of his family had already begun as soon as they moved in. And so Derek is reading through this letter and he's realizing that whoever is sending this is not a friendly neighbor at this point. This is someone who is out to harm them in some way. So he takes the letter, he runs back into the house, shuts all the windows, locks all the doors, leaves the house and goes right back to his wife and his kids that are at their old home. And they promptly call the police. Police show up, they read the letter, and they're like, what is this? Do you have enemies? Who wrote you this? Because even the language inside the letter was like, it was not quite Old English, but close. It was like this bizarre writing, and it was just very stalkerish and awful, and the police just don't really know what to make of it. And Derek and Maria are obviously very upset. They haven't even moved into the house yet, but this is a big cause for concern. So the letter did not have a return address, but at the end of the letter, it just said,
who am I? I could be someone that's walking by your house every day, I could be someone driving by your house every day. I could be one of your neighbors. I could be anybody that you see at any given day, and you'll never know.
And then it just says, signed, The Watcher. After the police leave that night and promise to launch their own investigation, Derek and Maria, they're totally on edge. And so they write an email, even though it's super late, to the Woods family. They're the family that sold the house to Derek and Maria. And they say, hey, we just got this strange threatening letter. Have you received anything like this? Because the Watcher claims to have been watching you for the entire time you were there. And the Woods family writes back and they say, 3 days, I think it was 3 days before we actually left the house, we did receive a letter. It wasn't threatening. It was just thanking us for our time in the house and treating it with respect, and that it would be taken care of going forward, and that this person would look after the house for us. And it was signed The Watcher. But to be honest, we didn't think much of it. We crumpled it up and threw it away. So the Broadduses decide that they are not going to rush to actually move into the new house. They had thought about doing it, but they decide with this letter that maybe it's best to hold off a little bit. And so Derek and Maria would do day trips with the kids. They'd go do day trips, do some renovations, make sure that the contractors that were there were doing a good job getting the house in order, and then they would come back to the house that they were still living in. About 2 weeks after that letter was found, Maria is there with the kids, and she gets to the new house and she sees there's a letter from the Watcher, the same envelope, same writing on the outside. And so she immediately calls the police even before she reads it. She opens it up and it says,
"Welcome again to your new home at 657 Boulevard. The workers have been busy and I have been watching you unload carfuls of your personal belongings. The dumpster is a nice touch. Have they found what's in the walls yet? In time, they will."
The Watcher goes on to identify each of their kids by nickname and by birth order, which implies that whoever this was close enough to Maria or to Derek when they were speaking directly to their kids using their nicknames that they overheard. Because it's one thing to know the children's full names, because it's possible that you could have looked it up online or something, but to know their nicknames, that implies a level of proximity that even though they knew the Watcher was probably in the neighborhood, almost definitely, this meant they were practically on top of one another. And it gets creepier. The Watcher also in this letter asks, about one of the children and says, is she going to be an artist? I saw her using her easel yesterday. Well, the easel that this girl had been using is in a back room of the house that is mostly obscured by trees and shrubbery. There's really only one vantage point where you could see this child, and it would mean you're right on the property, like pretty much in plain view of anybody there. And with Maria and Derek and basically everyone on high alert looking for this person, it seems odd that they could be able to see this girl working at her easel in this kind of hidden back room and not be spotted. And then of course, to kind of seal the deal, making this letter just totally terrifying, they go on to say,
"Do your kids go in the basement? I'd be afraid if I were them. It's far away from the rest of the house, and if you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I'll know as soon as you move in. Then I can plan better."
So at this point, Derek and Maria are in full crisis mode, because it's one thing to be watched, which is bad. It's another when the person watching you is now overtly threatening your family, your kids. It's a bad situation. So Derek and Maria at this point, they don't know if they're even ever going to move into this new house. It felt unsafe. And so for a few weeks, they're kind of teetering on whether it's worth moving in or not, and so that they aren't there. They're not going to the new house at all. And a third letter arrives basically saying, "Where are you? The house misses you," obviously from the Watcher. At one point between the first letter and third letter, Derek was speaking with John Schmidt, who lived 2 doors down from their new property on Boulevard. And John was saying that Derek ought to look into the Langfords. It was a family that lived right next to their new house. Kind of a little bit of a strange family. It was a 90-something-year-old mother and her adult children who lived with her, who were all in their 60s. And one of the children, Michael, he was just known in the area about being a little bit odd. Like he would just kind of creep out other people. It wasn't uncommon to have him like walk across people's property, you know, like little things like that, like looking in windows, just giving the vibe that he was a little bit strange and people didn't really like being around him. So Derek brings it up to the police that, hey, you should look into Michael Langford. He lives right near us. Neighbors are saying he's a little bit off. The police were like, actually, he was the first person we talked to. We brought him in, we questioned him, he denied it, we have no evidence tying him to it, and we just don't think it's him. And then later on in the investigation, they would actually do a DNA sample from one of the letters, and they would find out that it was a woman's DNA. And so that effectively ruled out Michael Langford, but the Langfords had a daughter, and so they decided maybe it could be her, and so they actually got a water bottle from her that they found, and they tested that, and it wasn't a match. So the Langfords were ruled out. Derek is growing increasingly more paranoid and angry. You know, he went from being, you know, scared of what was potentially going to happen to feeling like, how dare you threaten my family, my kids? And he started telling the police, like, if you don't find who's doing this, I'm going to figure out who it is, and then you're not going to be dealing with, you know, a stalking case. You're going to be dealing with a different kind of case, if you catch my drift. And so the police were like, don't do anything crazy. We're working as hard as we can. It's just there's not much to go on here. Derek wasn't okay with that. He set up this elaborate camera system in and around his house, the new house. He started staying at the new house, turning off all the lights and crouching behind windows and staring at the mailbox in hopes of being able to confront anybody who went near it. He ended up hiring 2 former FBI agents to launch his own private investigation. He hired a handwriting expert to analyze the letters themselves to see if they could pick up details about who this was and potentially profile them. And this person, all they could conclude was it was someone who was really, really mad. But all those things really didn't lead to any results. You know, it was just Derek had become obsessed, and he was willing to basically do anything to find out who the heck is writing these letters. So at this point, the Broadduses had already sold their old house. They were still living in it because they hadn't moved into the new house, the house being watched. But at some point, the new owners of the house they sold were ready to move in. And so the Broadduses had to move in with Maria's family, but were still paying the mortgage on 657 Boulevard. At this point, the community started kind of spreading rumors about the Broaddus family. People believed that the reason they weren't moving into this beautiful new home was, you know, they were getting a divorce, or they had some legal problems. You know, the letters and what was going on with these letters, that was not widely known. There was speculation about it, but no one really knew for sure. So Derek and Maria kind of gradually became pariahs, and they ultimately decided that they're just going to sell this house, this new house they purchased, because they need the money. They've tied up a lot of money in it, and they feel like, you know what, we'll sell the house and we'll move on. But by the time they listed it, enough rumors were circulating about the weirdness around that house and why no one was moving into it, and the weirdness with Derek and Maria, that nobody wanted to buy. And so they initially list this property above what they paid because they'd put $100,000 into the house in renovations. They just kept doing renovations, and that was their way of justifying not moving in. They were like, we'll keep fixing it up. It'll be better once we move in. But, you know, so they put $100K in and no one bid. They lower the price, no one bid. They continued to lower the price to where it was like a full-blown deficit. Still, no one made an offer. So it sat vacant. from their nosy neighbors. It was just a total train wreck. Finally, the Broaddus family got some good news, literally years after this first letter is sent and they tied up all their money in this new house. A family agrees to rent the house. Now, this is going to be at a loss for the Broaddus family. The rent money